When Americans speak of political dynasties, none inspire more fascination or more fear than the Kennedys. For decades, newspapers have called them America's royal family, a clan built on impossible wealth, unshakable ambition, and the belief that they were destined to rule. But behind the glamorous photographs, the Hollywood smiles, and the carefully crafted public image lies a story drenched in tragedy, secrecy, and whispers of a curse that has haunted the family for generations. The story begins with Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., the ambitious patriarch who clawed his way from the streets of Boston to become one of the most powerful men in America. Joe Kennedy believed his family was chosen for greatness. He groomed his children like heirs to a throne, shaping them into future kings of American politics. His eldest son, Joseph Jr., was meant to be the first Irish Catholic president of the United States. John, Robert, and even the younger children were raised with a single purpose: to expand the Kennedy legacy. But fate had other plans. The first sign of the so-called Kennedy curse came during World War II. Joe Jr., the golden child, volunteered for a top-secret mission, Operation Aphrodite. The plan required pilots to fly explosive-packed aircraft toward enemy sites and then parachute out. But on August 12, 1944, something went horribly wrong. Before Joe Jr. could escape, the plane detonated mid-air. His body was never recovered. The Kennedy heir, the prince of the dynasty, was gone. Joseph Sr. was devastated, but he didn't let the dream die. He simply shifted his ambition to his second son, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Charming, charismatic, and impossibly photogenic, John captured America's imagination. Yet behind the scenes, his health was crumbling. Newspapers never reported it. But JFK suffered from chronic illnesses, used crutches in private, and took daily injections just to stand upright. To the public, he looked like a young king. But in private, he was a fragile man carrying the weight of a family legacy. With Joe Jr. dead and JFK pushed forward, the pressure on the second son intensified, and the darker parts of Joseph Sr.'s strategy began to emerge. Rumors swirled about the patriarch's dealings during Prohibition, his secret connections in Hollywood, and his discreet political manipulations. Some even whispered that Joseph Kennedy Sr. had made an unspoken bargain with forces he should never have crossed, superstitious or otherwise. Then came Rosemary Kennedy. Rosemary, the third child, struggled with learning difficulties. In a family obsessed with perfection, she was considered a liability. Joseph Sr. took drastic action, a decision so horrifying it would stain the Kennedy name forever. In 1941, without telling his wife or children, he authorized a lobotomy to, quote, fix Rosemary's behavior. The operation left her permanently disabled. When the truth finally emerged years later, many wondered whether that unforgivable act was the moment the curse truly began. As JFK entered politics, tragedy continued to brush against the edges of the family. In 1955, he underwent a risky spinal surgery and nearly died from infection. But he survived. Barely. Supporters called him resilient. Critics whispered that the Kennedy family was tempting fate, pushing beyond human limits, refusing to accept defeat. By 1960, with a mixture of charm, strategy, and ruthless political maneuvering, John F. Kennedy won the presidency. For Americans, it felt like a coronation. Camelot, they called it, the modern American monarchy. But inside the White House, the shadows deepened. Secret affairs, political enemies, intelligence conflicts, and family pressures swirled beneath the surface. No one, least of all John, realized how soon the next tragedy would strike. John F. Kennedy entered the White House like a shining star, a modern king in a nation that claimed not to have monarchs. The world admired him. America adored him. But his rise to the presidency also brought enemies. Powerful, silent, and deeply entrenched. Inside Washington's political labyrinth, whispers began to circulate. No one rises that fast without stepping on dangerous toes. Behind the polished speeches and the glamorous state dinners, the Kennedys faced an avalanche of political tensions. The CIA distrusted JFK for refusing to support covert military operations after the Bay of Pigs disaster. The FBI, led by J. Edgar Hoover, kept detailed files on the president, tracking every movement, every rumor, every personal weakness. Even within his own party, some resented his power, calling him too young, too ambitious, or too unpredictable. But it wasn't only politics. JFK's private life created its own storms. His affairs, carefully hidden from the public, were an open secret among Washington insiders. Some involved Hollywood stars, others involved women tied to dangerous circles of influence. These relationships provided endless opportunities for leverage, manipulation, and blackmail in the tense environment of the Cold War. By late 1963, the political pressure around the president had reached its boiling point, and yet JFK ignored the warnings of his closest advisors. He believed that the presidency required him to be visible, present, and connected to the people. He wanted crowds, he wanted cheers, he wanted the image of strength. On November 22, 1963, in Dallas, Texas, the Kennedy motorcade rolled into Dealey Plaza. The sun was bright, the atmosphere electric. People waved American flags as Jacqueline Kennedy, dressed in her iconic pink suit, smiled gracefully at the crowd. To the public, it seemed like a perfect political moment, JFK reclaiming America's love after difficult months. But in the shadows above the plaza, another story was unfolding. At 12:30 p.m., the sound of gunfire shattered the air. 3 shots, officially. The president collapsed into Jackie's arms. The motorcade sped toward Parkland Hospital. But the world already knew the American king was gone. The Warren Commission quickly named Lee Harvey Oswald as the lone assassin. But even before the ink was dry, Americans refused to believe it. The Kennedy name carried too much power, too many enemies, too many secrets. And so began one of the greatest waves of conspiracy theories in history. Some whispered that the mafia was involved, retaliation for Bobby Kennedy's crusade against organized crime. Others suspected the CIA, claiming JFK planned to dismantle their covert operations. Some pointed at the military establishment, furious over the president's reluctance to escalate the conflict in Vietnam. Still others believed foreign governments had a hand in it, viewing JFK as a threat to their geopolitical ambitions. Within hours, Dealey Plaza became a shrine of questions with no answers. The mysterious grassy knoll, the odd trajectory of the bullets, the conflicting eyewitness testimonies, the rushed investigation, the destruction of key evidence. Everything fueled the belief that the truth had been buried under layers of power, secrecy, and political convenience. And then, as if the web of mystery weren't tangled enough, something unbelievable happened. 2 days after JFK's assassination, Lee Harvey Oswald was shot in a crowded police station by nightclub owner Jack Ruby, live on national television. No trial, no answers. The American people watched in shock, and the conspiracy theories exploded. Many suspected Ruby was silencing Oswald on behalf of someone far more powerful. Others thought he acted alone, driven by emotion. But inside Washington, a different question circulated quietly. If JFK was the king of America, then who had the authority and the audacity to remove a king? For the Kennedy family, the assassination shattered the illusion of Camelot forever. The kingdom they had built stood on foundations far more fragile than the public ever imagined, and the shadows that circled them were only beginning to rise again. Because JFK's death was not the end of the Kennedy tragedies. It was the beginning. After the assassination of John F. Kennedy, America looked to his younger brother, Robert Francis Kennedy, as the natural successor to the throne of the nation. If JFK had been the king, elegant and charming, then Robert was the warrior prince, relentless, sharp-minded, and unafraid of confronting the darkest corners of American power. In the years following his brother's death, Robert transformed from attorney general into a symbol of hope. He challenged corruption, demanded justice, and spoke about healing a divided nation. Crowds followed him everywhere, children ran to him. Mothers cried when they met him. Even hardened political commentators admitted that Bobby Kennedy carried something rare, an authenticity America had been starving for since the tragedy in Dallas. But Bobby also inherited his brother's enemies. As Attorney General, he had waged a personal war against the mafia, exposing high-ranking crime bosses and crippling their operations. Many of these men had ties to powerful political and financial networks, and they did not forget Bobby's crusade. They waited, quietly, for a chance to strike back. It wasn't just the mafia. Bobby's clashes with the CIA were legendary. He pressured them, questioned them, and openly criticized their covert operations. His demands for transparency threatened the agency's deepest secrets. And within the Pentagon, some military leaders viewed him as dangerously idealistic, an obstacle to their strategic ambitions. Yet despite the danger, Robert pushed forward with a fearless confidence that both inspired and worried those around him. Friends warned him repeatedly that the Kennedy family was cursed, that tragedy followed them like a shadow. Bobby dismissed the superstition, but in private, he often spoke about destiny, fate, and the enormous pressure of carrying the Kennedy name. In 1968, when Robert announced his run for president, America erupted in excitement. For many, he was the chance to restore the dream of Camelot. Crowds filled parks, streets, and train stations to glimpse him. His voice, soft but fierce, promised unity, justice, and a new beginning. But with every rally, every speech, every surge in popularity, the threats grew louder. The FBI warned of increasing danger. Advisors begged him to strengthen his security. Bobby refused. He believed that a leader should never hide from the people. It was a romantic ideal, one that would have devastating consequences. On June 5, 1968, after winning the California Democratic primary, Robert Kennedy walked through the kitchen of the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. Reporters trailed behind him. Supporters cheered. It was supposed to be a night of triumph. Then shots rang out. The chaos inside the kitchen was immediate and overwhelming. Screams echoed, people fell to the ground, and flashes from cameras blurred with the sound of gunfire. Bobby collapsed, his rosary beads falling from his hand. As he lay on the cold floor, a hotel busboy cradled his head, whispering prayers he could barely hear. The official story claimed that Sirhan Sirhan, a lone gunman, assassinated Robert Kennedy. But from the first hour, hundreds of questions emerged. Witnesses reported seeing multiple shooters. Some claimed Sirhan appeared hypnotized or confused. Ballistics evidence didn't match the number or direction of the shots. Even the medical examiner said the fatal bullet entered from behind, while Sirhan was in front. Once again, a Kennedy assassination became a labyrinth of contradictions, missing evidence, and impossible explanations. Theories spread instantly. Was it retaliation from the mafia, seeking vengeance for Bobby's relentless pursuit? Did intelligence agencies fear Robert would expose secrets related to his brother's death? Did political forces worry he was too powerful, too beloved, to be controlled? Whatever the truth was, it died with him. As the Kennedy family gathered around Robert's coffin, the world watched in silence. Two brothers, both murdered. Two dreams, destroyed. Two futures, erased. The American monarchy had suffered a second blow, and this time, the nation began whispering openly about the curse. The newspapers called it tragedy. Historians called it fate. But to the public, it felt like something darker, something unnatural, was stalking the Kennedys. And the curse had no intention of stopping, because more shadows were waiting. As the American public mourned the deaths of John and Robert Kennedy, another question began rising like a ghost from the national subconscious. Why does tragedy strike this family again and again? To many, it seemed as though the so-called Kennedy curse had set its sights on the next generation, and the pattern of loss that followed the children of the dynasty would only deepen the myth, turning it into something almost supernatural. Joseph P. Kennedy Jr. was the first. The oldest son, the one groomed to be president long before John or Robert ever dreamed of politics. Joe Jr. was bold, ambitious, and eager to make his father proud. During World War II, he volunteered for one of the most dangerous missions imaginable, a secret operation requiring his plane to be filled with explosives. When the aircraft malfunctioned mid-air, it erupted into a fireball. Witnesses said the sky itself seemed to split open. He was instantly killed. At 29, the first heir to the Kennedy dynasty was gone. Joe Jr.'s death shattered the family's plans, shifting the burden of leadership onto John. And decades later, when Americans looked back at the timeline, Many wondered if the curse had started with the explosion that marked the fall of the first Kennedy son. But tragedy did not stop there. Kathleen "Kick" Kennedy, beloved for her charm and rebellious spirit, sought a life of independence in England. She married into British aristocracy, becoming part of the Devonshire family, an alliance that blended American ambition with old-world nobility. Yet in 1948, just 4 years after the wedding, her plane crashed into a hillside in France. Everyone on board died. Kick's death left the family stunned once again. Her mother, Rose Kennedy, fell into deep grief. She began speaking privately about a pattern she could no longer ignore, an invisible force pulling her children away one by one. But the tragedies of the next generation were only beginning. Decades later, John F. Kennedy Jr., America's golden child, became the symbol of hope for a modern Camelot. With his movie star looks and the Kennedy charm, many believed he would eventually run for office. Headlines called him, quote, America's Prince. Magazines featured him as the face of the nation's future. Wherever he went, crowds gathered. He was the closest thing the United States had to royalty. But on July 16, 1999, while flying a small aircraft to Martha's Vineyard, JFK Jr.'s plane disappeared from radar. After hours of searching, the wreckage was found in the Atlantic Ocean. John Jr., his wife Carolyn, and her sister Lauren had all died on impact. The news hit the world like a shockwave. Commentators couldn't help but ask the same question: how many tragedies can one family endure? Conspiracy theories exploded online. Claims of sabotage, government involvement, jealousy, or political motives. But most Americans simply felt heartbreak. The Prince of America was gone. Even more unsettling were the stories that emerged about the days before the crash. Some claimed John Jr. had voiced fears about flying. Others said the weather reports were unusually unstable. Still others believed he was being watched by unknown parties. No theory was ever proven, but the whispers only fueled the legend. The pattern continued in smaller, quieter tragedies, car crashes, illnesses, accidents, and sudden deaths that touched cousins, nieces, and nephews. Over time, the Kennedy family's private grief became almost as famous as their political legacy. The idea of a curse tightened its grip on the public imagination, turning each new tragedy into another chapter in an impossible, unending saga. Inside the family, the sense of dread was real. Some spoke of the pressure, the emotional weight of being a Kennedy, living under constant scrutiny, carrying expectations no one could meet. Others believed the tragedies were the result of the family's relentless pursuit of power. A few whispered that Joseph Kennedy Sr. had made dark deals early in his career, alliances with questionable figures that had rippling consequences. And yet, despite the fear, despite the heartbreak, the Kennedy children continued stepping into public life. They campaigned, they served, they tried to uphold the legacy their fathers had left behind. But every time a new Kennedy rose to prominence, America watched nervously, wondering, would the curse strike again? The story of the Kennedy children wasn't just a collection of accidents and misfortunes. It was a haunting reminder that great power often comes with great sacrifice. And in the case of America's royal family, the price seemed unbearably high. By the time the 21st century began, the phrase "the Kennedy curse" had become one of the most recognizable expressions in American culture. Newspapers used it, documentaries analyzed it, psychologists studied it. And yet, the phenomenon remained impossible to fully explain. To some, it was nothing more than a tragic coincidence, a series of unrelated accidents affecting a high-profile family constantly in the spotlight. But to others, especially those who followed the darker corners of American history, the Kennedy tragedies looked far too coordinated to be random. Whispers circulated about Joseph Kennedy Sr., the patriarch of the family. Before he became a political kingmaker, before he bought his sons their first steps into power, he was a man navigating the underworld of early 20th century America. There were rumors that he made deals with mob bosses, traded favors with corrupt bankers, and used aggressive tactics to build his empire. Some claimed he betrayed former allies on his rise to wealth. Others believed he crossed people no one should ever cross. The theory was simple. If Joseph Kennedy climbed too high, too fast, someone or something might have wanted revenge. But the darker theories were even more disturbing. Some claimed the Kennedy family had been targeted by intelligence agencies, first John, then Robert, and later their descendants, as punishment for challenging the establishment. JFK's threat to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces was quoted endlessly. RFK's attempts to expose information about his brother's assassination raised more questions, and JFK Jr.'s rumored plans to enter politics shortly before his fatal crash added fuel to an already uncontrollable fire. Yet, despite all this speculation, the Kennedys remained a symbol of hope. They were one of the few political families in America that inspired genuine emotion, love, grief, admiration, even obsession, and that devotion didn't fade. If anything, the tragedies only strengthened the public's fascination with them. Behind closed doors, however, the surviving members of the dynasty spoke of pressure that felt almost unbearable. They carried the expectations of millions, the shadows of their lost family members, and the constant fear that the next tragedy was just around the corner. Some tried to escape the spotlight by moving away or living quietly. Others stepped into politics, determined to continue the mission of public service that defined the Kennedy identity. And they did achieve victories. Senators, governors, ambassadors, activists, authors. The Kennedy name continued echoing through American history, proving that a curse, real or not, could not erase their influence. But even in modern times, strange patterns persisted. In 2012, Mary Richardson Kennedy, the wife of Robert Kennedy Jr., died under troubling circumstances. In 2019, Sowars Kennedy Hill, the granddaughter of RFK, died suddenly at just 22 years old. Each tragedy sparked new theories. Social media exploded with speculation, resurrecting old questions and creating new ones. Was it the emotional toll of growing up in a family marked by loss? Was it the intense pressure of public life? Or was it something more? For many Americans, the Kennedy saga became a myth, part Shakespearean tragedy, part political thriller, part unsolved mystery. And like all myths, it carried lessons about ambition, destiny, and the dangers of great power. Yet the family itself, despite everything, has never accepted the idea of a curse. They speak instead of resilience, duty, and service. They insist that the true legacy of the Kennedys is not tragedy. It is perseverance. And perhaps that is what makes their story so compelling. Because even as the decades pass, even as new political dynasties rise and fade, the Kennedys remain unmatched. They are woven into the American identity, representing both the nation's greatest dreams and its darkest fears. In the end, the curse, real, imagined, or symbolic, has become part of their legend. Every generation produces new heirs to the legacy, young Kennedys who step forward with courage despite the shadows behind them. And maybe that is why the story refuses to die. Because as long as there is a Kennedy in public life, as long as one member of the family dares to take the political stage, America will hold its breath, waiting to see whether the legacy leads to triumph or tragedy. The dynasty continues. The mystery endures, and the curse remains unfinished.